kick is up, and it's good.
You're listening to The Extra Point.
Ladies, gentlemen, and all those in between or outside of it, welcome to Monday Night Mock Drafts with Evan, right here on the Fantasy Football Network, coming to you every Monday evening until week 1 of the NFL season. I am your host, Evan Sather. Tonight, my guest works for one of the greatest analytics teams online. He is a senior fantasy analyst and software developer for Pro Football Focus. He's also pretty amazing at posting rankings in the Fantasy Pro system, having finished in the top 3 in both 2019 and 2020. Please welcome to the show, Nate Jahnke. Nate, great to have you, my friend. So glad you could make it. How are you, my friend?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to doing a draft with you.
Absolutely, first timer. So I was super glad to get you too. I know we got a little bit back and forth on Bluesky too. Haven't really gotten the chance to check out a lot of PFF lately, but I mean, they never cease to amaze me with the premium content, and especially coming up with a ranking system for offensive linemen, which is already one of the most difficult positions to score in the game of football. And you could absolutely make a good point for the way they score certain offensive lines. Like, I still go back and forth with how PFF scores like the Jets offensive line, where they've definitely got some talent with some of their guards and tackles, but you just wouldn't know it based off of last year, where Justin Fields still had to take off running for his life with just Garrett Wilson, and that's about it, right?
Oh, yeah, and only for half the season, and then it was a bunch of wide receivers who were like 4th on a team's depth chart, and they add them halfway through the season, and they end up being top wide receivers on the team for the second half of the year.
And that defense that used to be really good under Robert Saleh, that, I mean, they they had a grand total of 0 interceptions, which doesn't fire up the momentum of any offense last year too. It was pretty amazing. They weren't even necessarily the worst team in the league either.
Yeah, when you trade away some of your best defensive players, that's going to do it for you. But having the strategy of trading for 2027 picks is something that hopefully will work for them, and hopefully will work for some fantasy managers as well if you've gone with that strategy.
I'll definitely want to ask you about Omar Cooper once we get started drafting, but I also wanted to highlight at least the latest article that you posted just earlier today with your top 60 rookie rankings. So I'm not logged in, and we won't be able to get to see the entire article, I'm sure, but you go into Jeremiah Love landing with the Cardinals, Ty Simpson shocking the football world, flying up to 7th in rankings, which I think that's interesting. I'm assuming that's for SuperFlex, but without spoiling things too much, what went into some thoughts about Ty Simpson moving up, as well as would there be any doubt about Jeremiah Love landing anywhere but the 101?
Oh, yeah, I think Love, he's been the 101 all offseason. It was pretty clear, regardless pretty much of what team he landed with, as long as he got drafted with a top 10 pick. So I think draft capital still plays a kind of big role in where you should end up drafting players, because teams know all this other information. Yeah, we've seen the film on all of them. They have all the medical information. They know how they want to use that player. And we know running backs, if they're getting drafted in the top 10, they're going to get a lot of usage. And that's the most important thing for a running back. It's not necessarily how talented you are, it's how many touches you're getting for fantasy. And any running back getting picked that early is going to see a ton of touches to make that draft pick worth it. So you mix the talent with all of that information, and he was the clear 101 for me in any kind of format. Beyond that, there were things that changed, especially in the first round. And then everything after the first round, a pretty big mess, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. But had the rankings out shortly after the draft, and then slowly over time hearing more about how coaches wanted to use players, and those kind of bits of information move players around a little bit over these past couple weeks.
Definitely. And Jeremiah Love being a top 5 player on PFF's predictive big board, picked 3rd overall in the real NFL draft. I mean, highest draft position since Saquon Barkley. You guys lay out a lot of stuff that even I forgot about, where Saquon went drafted how many freaking years ago at this point? Gosh. I've seen a variety of opinions throughout rookie drafts so far. Some people want to trade out of the 101. They don't necessarily want to draft Jeremiah Love. But then I'm on the team of, well, there's no reason to even skip out on Jeremiah Love if you're great at running back. So, Nate, where did you land on this particular? Is there a good reason to even trade out of this year's 101 to skip out on Love?
I don't think so. It would have to be like for some veteran player that I'm high on and or future draft pick, some combination of that. But I don't see myself trading back in this draft. I don't see myself going and getting like the 104 and then other draft picks or other not as important players. I'd rather have Love than anyone else in the draft. So it would have to take some other good veteran player, something like Ashton Genty or some combination of if someone has to add more or less to that trade. But it would have to be a solid young veteran player to get me away from Love.
Most definitely. So we'll stop here at the first part of this article here. So be sure to check that out on PFF.com after this show under the news section. Fantasy Football Top 60 Dynasty Rookie Rankings, written by the great Nate Jahnke, who we have right here with us tonight. So I'm hoping that'll entice a few of you to subscribe to PFF as well here. And as you can probably see in the corner of that screen, $25 a month or $120 a year. Top notch content you just can't skip out on. So we'll go over a little bit of what positions we're going to have in tonight's draft as well. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, I've got it divided. So when we take a look at this draft board, there are 4 rounds. Ignore that 4th round. I'm going to make sure we stop us at the 401. Sleeper forces me to have that 4th round just because I am dividing this by 4 different positions because I just have to have that 4th round. Sleeper forces it on me. And if I don't include every single position, you're only going to have one category to choose from. That's not a good time for everybody. So we're making this easy for all of our great mock drafters. Nate, I think we've kept the people waiting long enough. Are you ready to get started, my friend?
Yeah, let's go ahead and start this.
I'm going to go ahead and click start. Here we go. Fantasy 5 is getting started. That's the great Ryan Weiss. So glad to have him with us. Went Jeremiah Love. Yeah, just like what we were talking about. Pretty much no reason to do that, even in a SuperFlex format. Frank in the chat next. He got Fernando Mendoza. Those are pretty much the bona fide 1 and 2. Nate, out of all mock drafts or just any leagues that you're in, have you ever seen a SuperFlex league not go Love and Mendoza 1-2?
I have seen Mendoza go 3 and Tate go 2 here and there. Largely just if the team is pretty well set at quarterback, I can understand going for the upside with Tate at wide receiver. But most teams, whether if they need a quarterback, if they're okay at quarterback, tend to go Mendoza.
For sure. As you're on the clock about to make this next pick, I'm going to share Zion Penumbra's comment here, sharing the link so hopefully more people come watch. Absolutely. Ladies, gentlemen, all those in between or outside of it, please share this video. Hit the like on this YouTube video right now. It helps us out in the algorithm. We're a brand new channel with a Fantasy Football Network. We greatly appreciate it. Currently only at 4 subscribers at the time of this recording. We want to build that up as greatly as we can. Building it from the ground up. Would love to see it if you guys could give us a subscription as well. So Nate, you went Mekhi Lemon over Jordan Tyson. I have not seen that much at all. What do you like about Mekhi Lemon over Tyson?
So heading into the draft, I like both players pretty well interchangeably. For me, I knew it was going to be whichever wide receiver ended with the best landing spot of the two is the one that I would prefer. And I like Lemon's landing spot with Philadelphia more than Tyson's with the Saints. I think both wide receivers are going to be second options in the offense. I don't think either one's going to overtake the top wide receivers on those two teams. So a lot of it's just coming down to, I think the Eagles offense is better than the Saints offense. I think they'll play better than they played last year. I know they went through a lot of problems last year, but they still are exceptionally talented on the offensive line. I think they're fairly good at quarterback, or at least a better quarterback situation in Philadelphia than New Orleans. And I think the passing offense can do better. I'm assuming A.J. Brown's not going to be there. Hopefully that situation gets resolved in 2 weeks from now. But because of all that, I like Lemon better. I know he's a slot receiver and is probably going to do some work over the middle. Philadelphia hasn't thrown there as much as other teams, but Hurts is still thrown in the middle at a high level when he's done it. And I can understand him not throwing as much when he has A.J. Brown on the outside to throw to. So with Brown gone, I expect them to throw the ball to the middle of the field more often than they have in the past.
You do bring up an interesting point with opportunity in their respective offenses, where Jordan Tyson might not overtake Chris Olave, and Carnell Tate. Well, he's going to be hard to get later after like the 103, but. Going after Omar Cooper, yeah, he's not going to be number one. Casey Concepcion might be number one for the Cleveland Browns, but does that really matter in their offense, though, Nate? Being that their offense is a mess, the quarterback situation is a mess. Todd Monken is not probably going to be the answer that they're seeking to fix their offense. So I think that's an interesting take, too, because June couldn't come soon enough so that we know what the Eagles are finally going to be able to do with A.J. Brown.
Yeah, and it was very interesting with how the draft went of like both Cleveland and the New York Jets ended up getting 2 receivers very early on in the draft. So if they just drafted 1 receiver early on, then I'd probably end up being higher on one of those receivers. But the fact that they went wide receiver back to back and the Jets went wide receiver and tight end early, it makes it harder to be excited about one of them, knowing that they're both going to be getting a lot of targets. Oh, and I
for sure. Mass Ill on Fantasy Football 8762. Thank you so much for that subscription. Greatly appreciated. We're going to have a lot more shows like this all throughout the offseason. Monday Night Mock Drafts with Evan is every single Monday night at this time. And then we've got Friday mocks coming up at 9 p.m. Eastern Actually, no, I'm sorry, 10 p.m. Eastern every Friday evening. So you'll definitely want to stick around. We're going to post a lot more than just live shows as well, between pre-recorded content with the extra point, and we'll have no shortage of great YouTube shorts for you as well. Definitely stick around. We got plenty more. Frank in the chat also pointed out that I went Katron Allen at the 110. I went him over Jonah Coleman, Nicholas Singleton. I don't know who Scofie Linnett is going to be taking here pretty soon. So Honestly, Nate, after Jadarian Price, I feel like every single running back after Price is pretty much a dart throw. Allen's opportunities look good. Singleton's opportunities look good. Coleman even looks like he might play maybe a decent role. Are you on the same page with me as that, where I'm just going to take a shot on Allen and hope for the best?
I think he's definitely up there among those running backs that you're considering. I think there's a couple things to take into account there. For me, a lot of it is what the role of the running back could be this upcoming season, since we see mid to late round running backs get replaced all the time the following year. So for running back specifically, for me, after the top 2, a lot of it is what are the odds that I think they will have a decent role as a rookie. And with Allen, I think there's definitely a chance that he has that in Washington. I just think it could be hard for him to have a full-time role, even if there's an injury to one of Washington's running backs. They have 5 guys who could realistically have a role this season. So it seems like even in redraft, it's going to be a situation largely to avoid, because I expect it to be at minimum a 2-man backfield, if not a 3-man backfield. And even if there's an injury, then it's still probably going to be a 2 or a 3-man backfield, where I think there's a couple of running backs where if the lead running back gets injured, I could see them taking over as the main running back. We've been talking about the second running back that you drafted there with the Raiders. I think he should be the number 2 running back in Las Vegas. I could see him getting a decent amount of opportunities from the get-go as the number 2 running back, potentially taking some goal line work. And if something were to happen to Ashton Genty, then he could very well be the lead running back for Las Vegas for as long as Genty's out. So he is someone that I am high on among the running backs in this class.
Genty got the absolute crap kicked out of him last year, too, with how bad that offensive line was. I mean, I don't know how any running back in Vegas survives. They almost killed Josh Jacobs, for crying out loud, but he's still going strong on the Green Bay Packers. But, yeah, Washington is a guy that I am surprised, but I'm also not surprised that he fell to the 210, considering how now he's behind Genty, and I think a lot of people are now out on him, myself included. I'm not planning on drafting Washington in any of my rookie drafts, but being that he fell this low, I figured, hey, why not? I really, really want to take a shot on him at this point. But I'm 100% with you on that as well, where a lot of these guys, these day 2 guys from last year or whatever, just get replaced no problem. And a guy like a Jonah Coleman could easily eat a lot of RJ Harvey's work. Because I don't know about you, Nate, but were you impressed with RJ Harvey's work last year, where that could be good for Jonah Coleman?
I wasn't all that impressed by his work. I think he did an okay job, and it was nice to see him put up some numbers late in the season. but he didn't impress me as much as I had hoped. I think there's a chance that he can improve in his second season, but I think it's another kind of situation like Washington where I expect Denver to be a 3-man committee. And even if there's an injury to one of the running backs, I still expect it to be a 3-man committee. Like they still have Jaleel McLaughlin, for example, as their 5th running back. And he's someone that, yeah, they've tried to replace him a bunch, but it's still someone that they can trust to have in the lineup. So I expect it to be a heavy rotation. The good news is he will hopefully get a lot of those touchdown opportunities. So that's something in his favor. But some of these backfields where I expect it to be a 3-man committee almost regardless, it's kind of hard for me to pull the trigger at running back.
Yeah, so it kind of seems like it's confirming what I said earlier, where after Jadarian Price, we're kind of just shooting a bunch of darts and hoping one of them hits between Katron Allen through Kalen Black, which was taken at the 301 by Ryan Weiss. You would think I'd be going for more for wide receiver, being that there's a lot more 3rd-round wide receivers this year that seem to be more plentiful, but you know, if you're not taking a shot on like a Caleb Bell or even a Skylar Bell or even a Jeremy Bernard as a 2nd-round pick, who knows who many of those guys are going to hit. I mean, I see that you went Dejon Stribling for the San Francisco 49ers. He's got a great opportunity. And now you did Max Clare, which I actually love that Max Clare pick, Nate. So Max Clare is now in a rather vague tight end room, for a lack of a better way to put it, where it doesn't seem like any of them really stood out, including Terrence Ferguson, even though Ferguson kind of looked a little better toward the end of last season. But Claire is still a 2nd-round pick, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. What do you see in Max Clare fitting in with this Sean McVay system? Is he going to have a passing down role right away?
I think he will have at least some role, and it might not be immediately, but I think down the line he should. It's kind of similar to some of the backfields we talked about with like Denver and Washington, where it's going to be a lot of guys. But I think at tight end with the Rams, it's going to be a lot of guys. They'll all see some kind of role. I was joking shortly after the draft that I'm just going to have to like rank the guys 31st, 32nd, 33rd, 34th, and 35th, and just kind of go from there. But I could see a tight end with the Rams starts standing out more in the receiving game, that they could be a big value in fantasy football. It's hard to know which one of those tight ends it will be, but I could very well see a tight end starting to stand out. And there's a chance that it could be Claire. So I'm willing to take that chance in the 3rd round here because the Rams have shown so much faith in getting their tight ends involved in their offense. So I think he's worth the risk, but I think tight ends in general, beyond the top 2 players, it's a pretty interesting what happened in the draft this year.
Yeah, and Stafford is definitely going to want more guys to throw to besides Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua as well. Checkdowns don't always work in the NFL anymore with how fast these guys get behind the line of scrimmage. So they're definitely going to need another up-the-middle type of guy to throw the football to. And I haven't read a lot of anything of a prospect profile for Max Clare that's anything different than what I just described, but let's stay on the Rams for a bit here, because Scofie Linnett took Ty Simpson at the 108, being that this is SuperFlex, and if you're really desperate to sit on a quarterback in your taxi squad, that could very well be a wait and see, maybe it'll pay off type of pick. Nate, I have no faith in Ty Simpson whatsoever. I just think he's another Anthony Richardson who only started in 15 games in college, which were all in his senior year, and he didn't even look that good for the Crimson Tide. Do you see this? Do you have a different opinion than me on Ty Simpson, despite landing in a really good offensive system with Sean McVay?
Yeah, I mostly have faith in Sean McVay, and that's a big reason why I have faith in Simpson, because I think Simpson will be the starting quarterback whenever Matthew Stafford decides to wrap things up. I do think there were some good things to see out of Simpson early on in his season. As the season went on, the tape didn't look as good, but I think there's a chance that in Sean McVay's offense, he can do great things. We've seen other quarterbacks in these kind of offenses put up some decent fantasy numbers, even if they're not the best quarterback. And for me, it's just, we've only seen those start, so he's a bit more of an unknown. So whether or not he ends up being good, whether or not he ends up being bad, we don't know how he'll end up being. But it's mostly because I trust Sean McVay's offense, and if he does end up being the quarterback there, should have Puka Nacua as one of his wide receivers at least. Hopefully have some other wide receivers. Devontae Adams probably won't be there at that point, but That's because I have so much faith in the Rams offense in general that if he's forced to start, I could see him putting up good numbers, even if he's not the best real life quarterback.
For sure. So we just finished the draft here as I had to end it prematurely so that we don't end up going into a fourth round, which is not the point of tonight. But I went a little more tight end heavy toward the end here, not necessarily on the Rams, but I went Justin Joly at the 310, which Frank in the chat seems to love that pick. And then Say Watt again went Oscar Delp at the 311. Do either of those tight ends have any significance for you, Nate, as far as what they could end up in their respective systems?
Yeah, I think Jolly is someone who has a chance to have an impact pretty much immediately in Denver's offense. Evan Ingram really didn't do all that much last year. So really going into the draft, I thought the two teams that most needed a tight end were Denver and Carolina, and Denver's the team that ended up addressing the position. So I think out of all of these later tight ends, he probably has the best chance to have a more immediate impact. And then Delp is someone who I think can get involved a little bit with the Saints this season, but I think he's more of a long-term Juwan Johnson potential replacement. So if you're willing to take the time and wait for Juwan Johnson to eventually no longer be with the team, and he recently signed a contract extension as well, so it might take a good 2-3 years before Delp's potentially the starter. But if you're willing to wait, I think he does have the talent to be an eventual borderline fantasy starting tight end. It just might be a little while.
Well, if there's anything we learned about Oscar Delp, it's that he has the greatest dog out of all the NFL rookies who were drafted, with a puppy that just wanted a place to sit on the couch. But yeah, you were not wrong about Juwan Johnson, though, signing that contract extension with the Saints. They really love this guy. He signed a 3-year, $30.7 million extension, which doesn't necessarily bode well for Oscar Delp on the surface, but that's until you remember that the vast majority of tight ends in the NFL need at least 2 seasons to get acquainted with the NFL level before they break out and start doing stuff. So yeah, if your taxi squad is... If you're not picky about who's on it, I'm more than happy to sit on an Oscar Delp. And Justin Joly is one of my personal favorites in this draft just because I love his route running. I love his speed. He seems like a more suitable replacement for an aging Evan Ingram who has dealt with enough significant injuries that is affecting his NFL and fantasy production. So, do you have any stronger takes on Joly at this time before we start seeing him at training camp?
I don't think I have any all that strong takes other than I think the opportunities there. Denver's offense is going to be a struggle in general because they have so many wide receivers as well, though. So even if he starts seeing the playing time, it might be hard for him to earn the targets because we're going to have a situation where like Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims are competing for snaps in the slot. They probably aren't going to be on the field at the same time very much after they added Waddle. So their wide receiver room was already a bit of a mess for fantasy purposes because they would trust one of their young guys one week and trust a different one a couple weeks later. And now all of their opportunities are going to be dashed a little bit. So even like a Cortland Sutton, I'm worried about because they drafted Pat Bryant a year ago. And I see him more as an X receiver like Cortland Sutton, so I could see Bryant cutting into Sutton's playing time now that Waddle's there. So I think Denver offense in general, Sean Payton's offenses has always been a bit of a mess for fantasy because he likes rotating his running backs and his wide receivers and his tight ends. So you have to be pretty excellent to maintain that playing time. And I'm just not sure if a rookie tight end is going to earn that playing time immediately to reach that stardom level needed in Sean Payton's offense.
Sean Payton is so much like Bill Belichick. He hates fantasy football. He will rotate whoever the hell he wants in and out as much as he wants, regardless of who you have on your fantasy teams.
Yeah. Adam Trotman's still probably going to see at least 50% of the offensive snaps in Denver, for example.
Yeah, and get one target if he's lucky.
Yep.
But Joey Wright, thank you so much for subscribing to the Fantasy Football Network as well. You've always been a great guy, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again at the Chicago Scott Fishbowl live draft again this year. It's gonna be a blast. Like more on that in a bit though. So Ryan Weiss also mentioned that he was choosing between Hurst and Black, but none of these wide receivers end up exciting him going into the 3rd round. Yeah, I don't blame him for taking Kalen Black over like a Zachariah Branch and Elijah Surratt. I don't really have any faith in any of those guys who all went 302, 303, and 304. Nate, do any of those later third round wide receivers, do they move the needle for you as far as potential fantasy production goes?
There's guys I think are worth throwing a dart on. Basically anyone in like the mid second round and later. I don't trust any of them. I think all of them are dart throws basically at that point, just with how the draft went, based on what we knew about the draft class heading into the draft, and with how many wide receivers are going in the second round. I do think Black has an opportunity this year. I think he has a chance of winning the number 2 job in San Francisco. And Christian McCaffrey was still excellent from a fantasy perspective, but his efficiency in the run game has decreased. His speed has decreased. So he's not quite the same player he once was, even if he was putting up the same fantasy production he once was. So there's an opportunity there. And even Hurst, I think there's an opportunity in Tampa Bay with how crowded that wide receiver room is. But it sounded like they want to move Emeka Egbuka to the Z receiver role, let Ted Hurst be the X receiver. So there's a chance Hurst sees immediate playing time in Tampa Bay. I'm not sure it'll necessarily lead to a ton of fantasy value. I could very well see them throwing a ton to Emeka Egbuka, a ton to Chris Godwin, and not leave a lot for everyone else. Just kind of thinking about Zach Robinson and how he was with the Rams offense, for example, and how they never necessarily had a clear X receiver who received a lot of targets. And definitely looking at his Atlanta offense, that wide receiver position didn't see a ton of targets, but he should at least see the field. And that's something that might not be the case for some of these other third round wide receivers.
For sure. And I think it's interesting what you said about Ted Hurst as well, who big game Jamie Perogue just took here, going Jordan Tyson at 106, Caleb Bell at the 206, and then Ted Hurst at the 306. So I think those are all great wide receivers to take shots on if you're just going to go all wide receiver in this particular rookie draft. So what I'm curious about from you, Nate, is that Ted Hurst, so where does this leave Chris Godwin at this point? Is he just going to start seeing a reduced target count, or is he going to be healthy enough to even take enough snaps with no more Mike Evans there? What does this mean for the Tampa Bay passing game?
Yeah, I'll be very curious of how much they embrace starting to use 12 personnel more often, because I think Godwin will mostly play in 3 wide receiver sets. I don't think he'll play in a ton of 2 wide receiver sets. So part of it will just depend on how much they embrace that kind of general strategy that's going around in the league, where teams are starting to use more 2 and 3 tight end sets. Tampa Bay didn't necessarily address tight end in free agency or the draft outside of re-signing Cade Otton, but they kind of have the same tight ends they've had for a couple of years there. And like we saw in the past with Sean McVay, which is where Zach Robinson came from a coaching perspective, they were one of the top teams in 3 wide receiver sets. And 2 years ago, when he was the offensive coordinator in Atlanta, they were among the leaders in 3 wide receiver sets. So if that remains the case in Tampa Bay, then Godwin's still going to be on the field all the time and should be number 2 in targets. And that'll be just fine for him from a fantasy perspective. But we saw last year in Atlanta, they started using more 2 tight end sets in some games. They started using more 21 personnel with 2 halfbacks on the field, both Algier and Robinson, in some games. And that meant less 3 wide receiver sets. And it was something that was game specific. So they decided based on what they saw in the defense, that's the strategy they wanted to use. So I could see Godwin potentially being frustrating this year in fantasy if Zach Robinson keeps that strategy in his first year of Tampa Bay of we'll see what the defense is this week and decide what kind of personnel groupings we want to use. So that could mean some weeks where Godwin's a huge part of the game plan and other weeks where he's not really a big part of the game plan.
Buccaneers fans are already frustrated with Todd Bowles as their head coach, so we'll have to see if Ted Hurst actually tries to smooth that over here. And Jamie Perogue says that Ted Hurst is basically a mini clone of Mike Evans. Based on his prospect profile, Nate, is that fair to say this early about Ted Hurst?
I mean, he's probably the closest thing they have to Mike Evans on the roster, but it's hard because Mike Evans, his size alone made him a pretty unique wide receiver. You're not going to find another wide receiver like Mike Evans on any of the NFL rosters. So, but I think Hurst is probably the closest thing they have to a Mike Evans. It's hard to trust anyone who was in the second round of the draft, let alone third round of the draft, to be anywhere close to where Mike Evans is. But in terms of what he does well, it's the closest thing they have to Mike Evans. I just don't see him having nearly the target rate that Mike Evans had. but there is a chance that Hurst could be used a bit in the red zone, which could lead to some touchdowns, which could help him.
And that's what would make him a great DFS play this year if Godwin is going to be upsetting a lot of shareholders of Ted Hurst this year. So I mean, if any of you listening play DFS, that would be a great week to week play depending on matchup. But I'll tell you what also is a great week to week play: hitting the subscribe button on the Fantasy Football Network if you haven't already, and like this video as well. We greatly appreciate it as a brand new team and a brand new channel, just trying to make some waves here in the fantasy football community. And while we're on the topic of big game Jamie Perogue, he also said that Ty Simpson is Josh Rosen. But I mean, so Nate, we just got done talking about Ty Simpson as well here, but does he succeed within 2 years or whenever Stafford can finally say no more, being that Stafford is basically held together by duct tape and bubblegum?
Well, Stafford is still playing well enough, so health is going to be the big thing. So a lot of it will just depend on when he suffers a big enough injury that makes him ready to end his career. So it could be 2 years, it could be 3 years. It's all time for him to learn. The big thing for me is a lot of this is uncertainty. We think we know stuff about the players, but anytime you look back at what we thought about the draft class a year ago and where those players are now, or look back 2 years ago, like Caleb Johnson's a good example of someone that everyone was really high on a year ago, and he's done nothing, and there's no signs that he's going to do anything this year either. So there's players that we thought were good that end up not being good. There's players we thought were bad that end up being good. We just don't know. NFL teams don't know. They mess up their draft picks all the time. There are players that they draft late that end up working out. There's players they draft early that don't work out. So the fact that the Rams were willing to invest that much in him means to me that it doesn't matter to me as much what I thought of the player. The Rams clearly like him. The Rams think he can develop into a good quarterback. There's a chance that happens. There's a chance that doesn't happen, but it's a risk that I'm willing to take more so than I'm willing to take a chance on most second-round running backs, most second-round wide receivers, and so on.
You would think that somebody would have gone up to the Rams scouting room and the GM and say, hey, you got a juicy quarterback class next year. What are you doing? Why take Ty Simpson at the 13th overall pick? But it's just like what you just said, Nate. They clearly love something in him, and we'll have to see if he can develop behind Stafford and become a startable quarterback in the NFL, making us all look like fools.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting a team like the Rams, like, we can be decently confident they're going to be one of the best teams in the league this year. Whether or not they're the best team or the fifth best team, they're probably not going to have a good draft pick in next year's draft. They're probably not going to have a good draft pick as long as they're a good team. So this was their one opportunity, having Atlanta's draft pick, of being able to draft a quarterback relatively early, since they weren't going to be able to draft any of those top, 6 or so quarterbacks in the 2027 draft without trading a whole lot to get one of them.
Yeah, we'll see if it works out, because I think the Rams are just shell-shocked over having a first-round pick with how often they traded those away over the years trying to win now. Let's move on from the Rams, though. FF Rabbit Dad drafting at the 112. Malachi Fields at the 211 is a bona fide steal, which Say Watt again took. I take him early second every day. So Malachi Fields has a great opportunity to replace Wan'Dale Robinson. They don't play exactly the same, but to slide into the number 2 role, getting ahead of Darius Slayton surely shouldn't be that difficult behind Malik Neighbors. Right, Nate?
Oh, yeah, they have a couple guys there. They added Darnell Mooney as well. I think Mooney is also competing for Slayton for that X role. I could see Fields being a little bit more of an outside guy than a slot guy. It'd be interesting to see how the Giants decide to use him. They also added Calvin Austin, who I could see playing in the slot. So it's going to be a mix of a lot of guys rotating in and out. I think Fields certainly has a chance to overtake pretty much all of those receivers at some point. It just might take a little bit of time. So it'll be interesting to see if it works out, but this is right around where I have him. That late second round is exactly where I would draft him in these kind of drafts. So a guy that I'm definitely happy to take a chance on, because I think there's a chance it works out. It's just a matter of how quickly he can overtake all of the guys on the depth chart, because the Giants did make a number of moves for veteran players, regardless of how good those veteran players are, but they are still players that are in Fields' way.
For sure, and considering the wide receivers who went after Malachi Fields between Jalen Lane, Zachariah Branch, Elijah Surratt, Chris Brazel, right? Yeah, Chris Brazel, and then Ted Hurst. Ted Hurst going at the 306 in retrospect kind of seems like also a steal by Jamie Perogue as well. But I mean, that we already just got done talking about Ted Hurst. But aside from him, yeah, I would absolutely take Malachi Fields over all those 4 wide receivers after him. Being that the 211, I don't think I'd want to trust a Skylar Bell as well, being that it just seems like the Buffalo Bills keep wanting to draft the same type of wide receiver over and over again, and then they trade for DJ Moore to be their top wide receiver. So I don't know. So does Skylar Bell do anything for you as well, Nate? Because I don't see him making any waves outside of like maybe special teams play.
I could see him becoming the number 3 option at wide receiver for the Bills. I think it's really Joshua Palmer that he would need to overtake. DJ Moore, I think, will play more of the X receiver role, which is what he did in Carolina back when Brady was his offensive coordinator there. So even though DJ Moore has done a couple of different things throughout his career, I think he'll kind of be in that Keon Coleman spot, just hopefully doing a bit better than what Keon Coleman was doing. So I think Bell will be in that kind of rotation for the slot role, for the Z role, that where Joshua Palmer plays. Khalil Shakir plays mostly in the slot, a little bit out wide. So I think he's kind of in that kind of competition. It'll just be hard for him to consistently see enough targets when there's so many other players, and Dalton Kincaid at tight end as well. So I'd probably expect him to only be 5th in targets at best, at least this season, until they move on from Shakir, whenever they end up doing that. But there's always injuries that happen, so there's a chance that if an injury or two happens at wide receiver, then he could have a really good season this year. But it would be hard for him as long as everyone stays healthy.
It's going to be interesting to see what else they choose to do with Khalil Shakir now that you bring him up, because the Bills signed him to a 4-year, $53 million extension, which puts him at an average of about $13.2 million per year. I mean, obviously that's nowhere near superstar money, but I mean, that's still pretty good wide receiver money that says they have a lot of confidence in him. Not bad for a former 5th round pick, but there's no like actual potential out that makes sense for the Bills until 2028. So maybe that does put Skylar Bell in line to potentially take that role if he develops within the first 2 years. So another taxi squad hold, right?
Yeah, it's definitely someone who helps the Bills more than it helps any fantasy manager, since the Bills, like last year, they had so many wide receivers that they were cycling through and just trying to find the right combination of guys. Like they had Curtis Samuel for the past 2 years. He didn't work out. They had Elijah Moore there for a while. He didn't work out. They got Brandon Cooks last year. I believe he's still not signed with anyone at the moment. So they went through a good 8 or 9 wide receivers who all saw significant playing time and only really had Shakir that they were happy with. So they needed more wide receiver depth. They got that wide receiver depth that just doesn't necessarily always help fantasy managers.
Yeah, that seems to be the case for a lot of these players here in this year's draft class. But, ultimately, we're just going to keep taking our dart throws and seeing which ones work out. Getting back to the comments here, though, Joey Wright informed us he had to back out of the Chicago Scott Fishbowl live draft. Hate to hear it, Joey, but still love the fact that you were considering coming as well. I have not been to Florida since 2002, my friend. I think I got to make my return to Florida someday, hoping that, everything is okay with, I've heard Florida has an increase in potential diseases like measles that I'll try to avoid, but that's another story altogether. Frank in the chat also says, I'm subscribed, by the way, except for the new channel. Frank, thank you so much, my friend. Looking forward to seeing you at Scott Fishbowl live draft as well. Greatly appreciated. Zion Penumbra also mentions that Emmett Johnson is going to be a solid stud because banking on Ken Walker always getting hurt and their later round running backs always seem to hit. Well, I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to agree with what was said here, being that players are not actually injured until they actually are. I don't like putting that narrative onto any player whatsoever, even if they have been hurt a lot. But Emmett Johnson does have a great opportunity to be the backup, a great backup running back to Ken Walker as well. What's your take on Emmett Johnson, though, Nate? Do you think he's going to have a relevant career that could offer some sneaky flex value?
I think in the short term, like a lot of these running backs drafted late, I don't see a great long-term opportunity for them. But like he was saying, there's an opportunity there that if Kenneth Walker does get hurt, whether or not he's prone to it or not, there's a chance that he does get hurt this season, because there's a chance any running back gets hurt this season, in which case there is a pretty solid opportunity for Johnson to be that primary backup. I think Amari DiMercato is there and could be the third down back this year. There's a chance DiMercato has shown some opportunities on early downs to be okay at some points in his career with Arizona. So I don't think it's a sure thing that he will be the top running back if Kenneth Walker suffers an injury, but there's certainly a chance that that happens, in which case he's in a very good opportunity in Kansas City's offense. So I am willing to take an opportunity on him, even though generally around the time he's getting drafted, I'm probably more likely to draft a wide receiver rather than draft him.
Considering where he's going to, it definitely makes sense, considering that it's Emmett Johnson, depending on where your league values him, could end up going around where Antonio Williams went, Casey Concepcion went, Eli Stowers went, or Stowers, excuse me, I keep saying Stowers, or Jonah Coleman for that matter. So yeah, just within like the late first, early second for a lot of leagues, certainly. Just entirely depends on league value. FF Rabbit Dad also mentions that Emmett Johnson is elite pass catcher as well, which I'm not so sure is going to be good for somebody like I forgot the name of that running back you just mentioned too. He played for the Cardinals last year. He was the guy that DiMercato was the guy who let go of the football too soon before scoring that touchdown, which was he pulled a Deshaun Jackson. Just like a lot of players seem to have done. But does Emmett Johnson take that away from DiMercato right away?
I don't think it'll be right away. I think Kansas City values their veteran players enough, and they brought in DiMercato for a reason. They also have Bernard Smith there, who is more of a receiver. Maybe he's able to develop into that receiving role as well. So there's definitely a lot of competition for that third down role. And I would have a hard time trusting for fantasy purposes whoever gets that role. Even Kenneth Walker, he has done well as a receiver when given the opportunity, especially 2024. He was their running back in the 2-minute drills, and he was the most effective running back in 2-minute drills out of all the running backs in the league in 2024. And then Seattle changed offensive coordinators. Both of their running backs saw their receiving production basically cut in half last year. So I think that had more to do with the scheme and the coaches more so than what had to do with Kenneth Walker or Zach Charbonnet were as receivers. So I think even Walker is capable of taking those third down snaps if Kansas City is willing to give him that much playing time. So I do think there is a lot of competition for that third down role, but there's a chance that Johnson is able to get there.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing a lot of hype for him in the comments, and even I've taken Emmett Taylor in some mock drafts. I've took Emmett Johnson in one real rookie draft in one of my dynasty leagues of a team I just inherited this year. So we'll have to see if that pays off as well. It's no secret that I go running back heavy in a lot of drafts because, in my opinion, you can never have enough running backs. It's a difficult position to get any value out of. You got handcuffs who get no value. You get third down backs who sometimes get low end flex value. It's difficult to grab if you don't already have a stud that gets 15 or more carries every game, and there's only so many of those to go around. So ultimately, I think that's an interesting landing spot for Emmett Johnson as well. So, but we'll get back to some of these other wide receivers on the board here because we didn't touch upon a lot of them. So, Casey Concepcion and Denzel Boston went at the 111 and the 203. So, without a proper offense, which I'm not convinced Todd Monken is going to be able to do for the Cleveland Browns, I don't think it's going to matter whether it's going to be Concepcion or Boston becoming the top wide receiver on the team, because we know it's not going to be Jerry Jeudy with how awful he was. So this seems to me like it's just going to be more of the Harold Fannin Jr. show. If the Cleveland Browns get in passing down situations, Nate, do you tend to agree with me on that? Is this Fannin's offense to run in the passing game?
I think Bannon will still have a very large role in the offense. I do think at least one of these wide receivers, if not both of them, could have at least some value this year. The nice thing is the two wide receivers are very different, so I think they aren't going to be necessarily competing with each other for playing time. I think their roles can be distinct enough in the offense. I do think it also helps that Cleveland finally was willing to move on from their offensive line. They kind of had that same group that when Nick Chubb was elite, they were a great offensive line, and they just kind of kept those guys as long as they possibly could, and it became one of the worst lines in the league, and they finally changed a lot of those players. So I think there's a chance Cleveland's offense can be better this year than it's been in the past year or two. The big things, the quarterback position, and that hasn't looked all that great. Maybe having more wide receivers will help them. I'd say they arguably had the worst wide receiver group in the league last year. So having more of these young, good wide receivers could help the offense. So we have seen in Todd Monken's offenses wide receivers having a bit of fantasy value. We saw in Tampa Bay with Mike Evans. We saw in Baltimore Zay Flowers. It's not necessarily a lot of wide receivers having value in the offense, but there have been guys who have had very good fantasy seasons, but they've also had quarterbacks who were able to get them those really good fantasy seasons. And I'm not sure Cleveland will have that this year, but I would definitely expect Cleveland to be drafting a quarterback in 2027, in which case the offense could be a lot better in a year from now.
So you're saying that you have no faith in Taylon Green?
Yes, that is true. I do not have all that much faith in that.
Take that, Taylon Green truthers out there. I mean, not to pick on you either, Nate. I don't have any faith in him either, or quite frankly, anybody on that depth chart. You know things are bad when Mary Kay Cabot of the Cleveland.com, the insider for the Cleveland Browns, mentioned that Deshaun Watson still has the inside track to start week 1 for the Cleveland Browns. You know, by necessity, being that they overpaid for him. But at the same time, you know, are they really going to pay him to waive him and not play him at all? You know, they don't want to end up like what the Dolphins and the Cardinals did with their respective quarterbacks. I'll tell you another offensive lineman that they didn't get rid of in Cleveland that kind of pissed me off in a way. Tevin Jenkins, one of the most below average, below expectation guards in all of football. You know, health was kind of a concern when he played for my Bears, but I just didn't think he was very good in pass protection, period. I mean, playing guard, yeah, you block more for runs as well, but I didn't even think he was all that good for that either. So, if you have Quinshon Judkins, I say good luck.
Well, even though they still have him, they did make at least some improvements on the offensive line, and it's to the point where I'm like not expecting the line to be average. They were just borderline historically bad last year, like especially I'd say a little bit more in the run game than the pass game. Like looking at both of the running backs last year, their yards before contact per carry were the lowest marks that we have seen in the 20 years of data that we have at PFF. That's how rough it was for the running backs to have any kind of value. So even going from what they had last year to a below average line is still going to be a pretty big step in the right direction.
So you're also saying that if you had to have any Arizona Cardinals running backs last year, yikes. So yeah, I guess we did touch a little bit about Jeremiah Love at the beginning too, but I just don't think they could have made a better pick at 3 overall, considering that they were bottom 3 in rushing last year. They had to have Jacoby Brissett throwing 40 or more times per game, being that they just couldn't get the run game going. And Trey Benson just isn't that good, along with James Conner keeping on having major injury after major injury. They could only take James Conner for so long, but yeah, I had some Trey Benson truthers on my Barely Fantasy channel yelling at me, acting like I'm just hating on the guy, but it's like, no, they absolutely could go get Jeremiah Love before they actually did it. But so Jeremiah Love surely is going to put the Arizona Cardinals back into does he put the Arizona Cardinals back in respectable contention in the NFC West this year?
Not in the NFC West because of how good the other 3 teams are in the NFC West. You could make a very solid argument that the Rams and the Seahawks in some order are the 2 best teams in the NFL right now, and the 49ers were also a fairly excellent team at times last year when people were healthy, and hopefully they can be healthy this year, unlike the past couple seasons. So I think Arizona is a pretty clear 4th in the NFC West heading into the season. I do think it helps the offense get better. Hopefully their defense hopefully for their sake, their defense can play a little bit better. Hopefully for fantasy managers' sake, the defense continues to allow a lot of points so they keep on throwing the ball and trying to score a lot late. But I think it will be a little bit rough for Love in terms of quality of play. I think it could be very similar to what we saw from Ashton Jeanty last year, where Jeanty was not the problem with the Raiders offense whatsoever last year. I think it was everything else around him. And now this year, it looks like the Raiders have put a couple more players in place in order for Jahnke to hopefully have a much better season this year. And I think Love will be similar, where he might not be a top 5 or top 10 running back right away, but I think he's still talented enough to be one of those top running backs in the near future, assuming Arizona is able to get a couple more pieces on offense.
So being that Zion Penumbra mentioned justice for Tyler Algier, I was convinced that the Cardinals brought in Algier, being that, one, they weren't that confident with James Conner anymore because he was averaging 2.97 yards per carry before getting injured, and they still don't have faith in Trey Benson either. So we were thinking it was probably going to be a split backfield between Conner and Algier. Then they drafted Jeremiah Love. So do you see Jeremiah Love splitting with Algier until Love is properly acquainted with the NFL talent?
Like every running back will be somewhat split. I could be seeing like a 70-30 split with Algier still getting a decent amount of work in there. I think Love will be a day one starter. I think he'll play at least 60% of snaps immediately. I think if anything, it could be closer to 50-50 as the season progresses. If Love gets more wear and tear on him and it ends up getting to a point where Arizona is out of playoff contention, then it's better off saving Love for the following year than necessarily making sure he's getting as many carries as he possibly can in a season that's already over.
Yeah, for sure. It's we just have to hope that the Arizona Cardinals don't ruin Jeremiah Love like how many of us are fearing that the Las Vegas Raiders are ruining Ashton Jeanty as well. Coming back to Cleveland for a bit, FF Rabbit Dad also mentions he feels like either Denzel Boston or Casey Concepcion will hit, but just not both. It's the only part of their draft that I don't like. They should have locked in one and just addressed another position. I tend to agree with FF Rabbit Dad here, where I think it's probably going to be Denzel Boston being the bigger body wide receiver who's going to be a great potential red zone option, where Concepcion I feel like is just the guy who's really fast and that's it. Otherwise, he's just probably going to be kick and punt returner. So, what do you think about this though, Nate? Did Cleveland do the right thing trying to build up their wide receiver depth, and will one of them hit?
I was perfectly fine with them drafting both wide receivers because there was a need at this point. The NFL is basically one where there's 3 wide receivers who are considered starters on a team. They at least needed 2 new starters at wide receiver, and they got those 2 new starters at wide receiver. They needed both players. It was either that or continue going with guys that haven't shown very much in the NFL so far. So I think both of them will have a chance to succeed in the offense. Thinking about Todd Monken's past, like he succeeded with Mike Evans, he succeeded with Zay Flowers. Those are 2 very different wide receivers. Boston's a little bit more like Mike Evans. Concepcion is a little bit more like Zay Flowers. So I think there's a chance for either one to hit. I think Boston might be a little bit more likely this season because I think the quarterbacks most likely to win the starting job in Cleveland are a little bit more willing to throw deep more often, whether or not they're good at throwing deep, but I think they are willing to throw to those X receivers a little bit more, where it might be a different quarterback needed in the future for Concepcion to have reach his ceiling. So we'll see which one ends up doing it. A lot will just depend on how good Cleveland's offense can get in the short term. Assuming they're not able to become an above average or great offense, then it's pretty likely that only one will hit, or they might get to a point where they're just canceling each other out because there's only so many good targets to go around and they're both getting some of them and Bannon will get some of them. But I think long term, if Cleveland gets the right quarterback, then I think both have a chance to be successful at the same time. They just need the quarterback, and we won't know that for another year plus.
Yeah, and when you're a Cleveland Brown with how long they've struggled to throw the football, yeah, good luck being relevant in both NFL and fantasy, considering how long that list has become. I think my favorite Cleveland Browns fan is that guy with that vest that has every single last name of every starting quarterback the Browns have had for how many decades now? Just add Sanders to the list. We'll have to see if they who else will they add to that list of who's going to be their starting quarterback. Coming back to the Cardinals, though, Nate, so James Conner needs to be moved too while he's got a year or 2 left. I agree with Zion Penumbra here. I was actually convinced that the Cardinals were going to be trading Conner after they drafted Jeremiah Love as well, but it seems to me like they're just gonna roll with James Conner for just the remainder of his contract, but presumably to back up, back up Jeremiah Love if they don't end up releasing him. So, yeah, do you see any teams trading for a James Conner, and would that be good for Conner shareholders at this point?
I don't think Conner will get traded. I know they restructured his deal so that he is getting less money, but more of it is guaranteed this year. So that makes it harder for them to trade or cut Conner at this point for this year. I think Trey Benson's a bit more likely to get traded. His contract is easier to get traded. I think Benson can be an okay running back. He's just gotten hurt anytime he's had an opportunity. Like James Conner's gotten hurt each of the past 2 years, and then pretty much immediately after Trey Benson's gotten hurt. So we just haven't really seen Trey Benson get that much of an opportunity because he's got hurt anytime he has gotten that opportunity. But I think Conner will remain on the roster. If anything, it might just be like a locker room kind of thing where I think Conner is just very well respected among the Arizona Cardinals. So I think even though I don't see Conner getting all that much playing time, if Love were to get injured, Conner should see more playing time. I think Tyler Algier is going to be the number 2 running back, so I think Conner is going to be the number 3. Conner's might see third down work. I think if they don't want Love playing all situations and they specifically don't want him as much on third downs for whatever reason, we could see Conner taking that role, even though he hasn't typically had that kind of role. But I think that's where Conner is at his career. I think he definitely has more fantasy value if he can find a way out of Arizona for this year. I just don't think that'll be happening.
Yeah, being on the wrong side of 30, I think I tend to agree with you about that part too, Nate. Like, maybe he can be a good, like, complementary running back for a much younger guy, but I don't think he's going to go anywhere outside of Arizona to be, like, the lead back. Not unless it's, like, an emergency situation where there just isn't anybody due to injuries, but that's just another theoretical story for another time. So, Nate, as we're starting to wrap up this episode tonight, I'll ask you what I ask everybody I have on this show. Out of all 3 of these rounds here, who do you feel had the best draft in a vacuum?
I think I'll go with the person who drafted after me. I'm not reading their name right now, but who got Tyson and Bell and Hurst. I was debating Hurst for my pick. With all 3 of them, I was debating if I wanted to get the other guy that they ended up getting right after me. So pretty happy with that draft, getting them all 1 pick after me.
Jamie Perogue, if you're listening, Nate just picked your team as the best draft of the night, so congratulations, good sir. All these value wide receivers paid off, if only this were a real league as well. But like I said earlier, it seems like Ted Hurst at 306 is one hell of a steal, too. And I love me some Caleb Bell as well. But before I forget, too, Nate, as we're starting to wrap things up, who in the Miami Dolphins wide receiver room is breaking out this year? And is it going to be Greg Dulcich instead?
Yeah, I'm probably leaning Greg Dulcich instead. He played very well on a per-play basis. The fact that they didn't really do much to the tight end room and brought him back suggests to me that they like him. So I think Dulcich will have a pretty good role. Outside of that, it's going to be a mess of a wide receiver room. We'll see who emerges, who doesn't emerge. I could see any of the 5 or 6 guys leading their wide receiver room in receiving yards. And I still wouldn't rule out them adding another player like Deebo Samuel as a free agent still. He could end up in Miami and being their number 1 wide receiver. And he has experience with Bobby Sloak as well back in both of their days with the 49ers. So something like that I think is at least possible still.
Good old Bobby Slowick Jr. Wishing him well, but he could not make it work in Houston, man. It's a shame, too. We'll get to one more question before we get out of here. So, not necessarily related to the draft, but Jonathan Brooks, do you think he will finally have his big moment, or do you think they will run Chuba Hubbard into the ground since he is more proven? I think this is kind of a murky backfield situation for the Carolina Panthers, Nate, being that they don't have Rico Dowdle anymore, but Chuba Hubbard is presumably going to be the lead back, and then whoever else steps up, probably Jonathan Brooks will get his chance, will be back there as well. What do you think, though, Nate? Does Jonathan Brooks have the potential to come back and have a good NFL career?
I think he has the potential to. Like, I'm not a doctor. I don't know how good his recovery is. It sounds like from everything they've said that it's going well. It should at least be well enough for him to play football again this year and probably have a decent role early on in Carolina's offense. We'll see if he can return to being the player that he once was a couple years ago. Hopefully that's the case. And I think Carolina is pretty interesting in that last year they were willing to be pretty flexible with their backfield, deciding who they're willing to play, who they're willing to not see as many snaps, and whichever running back was playing better, they ended up giving that running back more playing time. So I think F. Brooks, who I expect to have at least some role in the offense early on, I think if he's outplaying Hubbard, he will end up being the starter at some point this season. So it all just depends on how well he's playing, but it's good to be in a situation where, if you're playing well enough that you can be the starter, you can be pretty fantasy relevant. So he is someone I'm willing to take a chance on in some of those rounds over some of the running backs who might have a more direct chance of seeing significant playing time, but are probably in a backfield that will stay a 2 or 3 man backfield all season, regardless of what happens.
I think I like that answer a lot because that is the direction the NFL is going. You're not going to have a lone guy anymore. This isn't the days of Emmitt Smith anymore. Like you're going to have 2 running backs that you're going to feature. Everybody saw how Detroit ran their running backs, so everybody wants to copy what works and keep their running backs healthy. So we're going to start to wrap things up tonight. So, ladies, gentlemen, and all those in between or outside of it, this has been another episode of Monday Night Mock Drafts with Evan. One last time, I'd like to thank my guest, Nate Jahnke, for joining us tonight. Be sure to follow Nate on Twitter at FFNateJahnke. You can also find him on Bluesky at ffnatejahnke.bsky.social and be on the lookout for Nate's articles on PFF.com. Nate, is there anything else that people should also be checking out from you?
Just check out PFF.com. I'll be ramping up the number of articles I'm doing, have a conversation with my editor tomorrow on what every article I plan on writing pretty much for the rest of the year. So definitely excited to ramp up the content there. And we'll have a lot at PFF also working on improving the tools on the fantasy side at PFF as well. So excited about both the tools we have at PFF as well as all the articles I'll be writing, and there'll be hundreds of them.
Even more reason to subscribe to PFF, people. Get on that if you don't already have a subscription. It's worth the money. Be sure to tune in next week for a surprise mock draft with the great Steven Johnson of the Bear Report. Also a big player in getting the Scott Fishbowl t-shirts and merchandise, as well as the Chicago live draft that he coordinates every year. I'm looking forward to having him back on the show. You're not going to want to miss that. This has been Monday Night Mock Drafts with Evan signing off. Have a great night, folks. We'll see you all next week. Take care.